In 2007, while I was living in Brazil, a certain game called Super Mario Galaxy released. When I finally got the game, that was a life-changing experience. To that point, I had never experienced the awe that a video game can produce, and I had never grown closer to a group of friends than I did through our shared experience playing Super Mario Galaxy. That was part of our lives, and Super Mario Galaxy was the thing that brought us together and created all these wonderful conversations. It's the thing that united us, that we talked about all day, every day. And to some degree, that game, the first true video game I had ever played, was the most meaningful experience I ever had in gaming. As I've grown older, it's become much harder for me to experience awe like that, to have games consume my life in that way, to have friendships revolve around mutual admiration and wonder. Those are luxuries of being young. And those friendships were something so odd and so unprecedented that it's hard, if not impossible, to replicate. The magic of playing Super Mario Galaxy the first time is something that has not quite been met ever since. So naturally, on June 2nd, 2009, when Super Mario Galaxy 2 received an unprecedented announcement to be coming to the Wii, that was a moment of pure bliss. Mario had never had two core 3D platformers released on the same console before, but that's not the thing we cared about. It was the fact that this game was being released. The game that changed our lives? Yeah, it was getting a sequel. That reveal trailer is something that I still remember. It's permanently ingrained in my mind to this day. I didn't have any internet access at the time, but whenever my dad was going to pick up pizza, he would let us watch the trailer on his iPhone 4 if we came with him. My brother and I would always fight to be able to go because we wanted to see that trailer again. I must have watched that trailer 30 times, once a week. Sometimes my dad would even show it to me twice when getting pizza. The point is, we were so excited. And when the game finally came out on May 23rd, 2010, and I finally got to play the game I had been mesmerized with for so long, let me tell you, the game did not disappoint. The levels were epic, the platforming was a blast, every idea from the first Galaxy game was taken out and perfected. We had Yoshi, which added so much to each level, and each level was so beautifully designed. On a technical level, Super Mario Galaxy 2 was the better game, but after playing it for a while, I returned to Super Mario Galaxy 1. Make no mistake, I love Galaxy 2 with all my heart. It is a phenomenal game, but there was something that I felt Galaxy 2 was missing that Galaxy 1 delivered. I didn't know what it was at the time, but the answer was atmosphere. Gameplay is more important than story. That is something we hear relentlessly in our era of video games. And of course we do, because it's correct. But because that phrase is so common, it's easy to ignore the value and effect the atmosphere of a game can actually hold on the gameplay itself. But the game's visual presentation gives gameplay a purpose. You aren't just shooting a block with paint. You're a human-squid hybrid that uses a custom gun to shoot ink at other hybrids. And when that change is made, well, now you have a reason to care. It's in our human nature to care about things that we understand as beings. That's why Super Mario Odyssey turned Mario's cap into a living entity. So in creating a game, those small characterizations bring life to the entire game. That change doesn't make any difference in the gameplay, but it makes a difference in how the player interacts with and perceives the game. And when the player is more involved with the game, they are going to have a better gameplay experience. So, even without changing the gameplay, visual presentation can improve a player's experience. So, in order to engage the player, the designer needs to have an art style that is enticing and cohesive with the gameplay experience. Take Greece, for example. The game thrives on immersion and scenic beauty. You are forced to feel lonely in this desolate and depressive atmosphere. It is quite sad, but it has to be that way, as the main character is experiencing depression, and the gameplay revolves around recovering from the trauma that causes that depression. To emphasize that, the art style is evolving with new colors and shapes that guide the player through the world. These colors and shapes help define your movement. When you have backgrounds that are so beautiful and detailed, you have to make it clear as the designer what is the foreground and what is the background. Some games fail to do this, like Halo 5, for example, but other games thrive on this, Grease being one of them. Shape design helps guide the player while still creating stunning environments. In every sense, the atmosphere of Grease improves the player and gameplay experience. It's a visually stunning game that wouldn't have even been possible, say, 20 years ago. As game design technology improves, the atmosphere that designers are able to create can be much more technologically and impressively dense. The rendering power of the PlayStation 5 alone is crazy. For a few generations of video games, companies have been racing to be the first to create photorealistic visuals. That's been the goal we've been reaching for. As such, many games would release with very realistic atmospheres that were technically impressive, but not nearly as interesting as what designers were creating on inferior hardware. The ability to create photoreal atmospheres has actually been a constraint on visual presentation. But the truth is, we did it. Photoreal atmospheres are possible now, and since it is, the urge to create them seems to have lessened. At the time of recording, Horizon Forbidden West and Elden Ring have both recently released. Both of these games could be considered the best in visual fidelity and art direction on their respective consoles. Both of these games have memorable atmospheres and worlds that entice the player to keep playing. Elden Ring, with its dark, brooding atmosphere that creates a lingering sense of dread. Forbidden West has these gorgeous, oversaturated fields that make the nature so much more immersive and dynamic. There's a sprawling world that looks gorgeous and alive. But that's what's great about both of these games' visuals, is that neither of them are photorealistic. Rather, they use the technology that can create photoreal environments and use it to create impressive, creative, and pleasant environments. In truth, atmosphere is not a matter of technological capability. Sure, with greater resources comes greater possibilities, but with artists so talented and designers so clever, even the weakest gaming hardware on any generation is home to endless artistic possibilities. Satoru Iwata once said that constraint is the mother of creativity. Take a look back at Super Mario Galaxy, an early Wii game from 2007. Yeah, it still looks jaw-dropping, and with the HD remaster on the Switch, wow, it looks gorgeous. Or what about Skyward Sword? The watercolor style makes this game look stunning. Even on powerful consoles, the same is true. Horizon Forbidden West takes advantage of the technology at hand, but the game looks gorgeous because of the artistry. Look at the vistas. They're stunning. And that's just because the artists were clever and talented. Some of these most incredible visuals have nothing to do with the technological capabilities. Rather, they have to do with the talent of the individual artist. But because atmosphere and gameplay are connected, a bad presentation can still hold back a game with a great gameplay loop. For a recent example, let's look at Pokemon Legends Arceus. Now, considering how frequently people criticize the visuals of this game, let me first give it some credit. The game looks drastically better in person than it did through YouTube. The compression did not help it. And functionally, the visuals are fine. They can be pleasant, they're nice. They're not great, but they're not awful. They're fine. Now, the gameplay in Legends Arceus is great. There's a fun and satisfying loop, but the intent of this game is to immerse the players as a trainer in a wild, natural world. So the natural atmosphere had to be great. Unfortunately, it missed the mark, and despite having a good gameplay loop, it failed to create that sense of immersion. Because of that, you feel like you're a trainer going through a video game map, rather than a trainer exploring the real world of Pokemon. Especially with the pop-in, the game fails to create a vibrant and coherent world to explore. Then there's the texturing. The textures fall short, giving a strange, glossy effect. And many of the textures are tiled, which is especially evident in the water. The water doesn't feel like a fluid body in the world, it feels like a patterned blob of their one water texture. Because of this, the vistas in the game don't feel as good as they could be. But to end on a positive note, the skybox is absurdly gorgeous. It is fantastic. If atmosphere changes the way the player engages with the world, then it's directly affecting the quality of the gameplay. When games are pretty and the worlds are enticing, then the player will be that much more willing to explore and interact with the world. It's because Allrest is so beautiful that players feel encouraged to walk off the beaten path and find secret locations or secret and interesting monsters. And that's when the player gets to see one of the greatest strengths of the Xenoblade series: the immersive, vast, dense, and dynamic worlds. Xenoblade 2 is a role-playing game, so the game has to ground the player into the role of that hero, and the overwhelming atmosphere of the game helps to do just that. But even without the need to immerse the player into a role of an RPG, a good atmosphere can make a world and level feel more epic and exciting. When Super Mario Galaxy took Mario into space, Yoshiaki Koizumi recognized that space could not be completely upbeat. Space is lonely. It's somber, and Koizumi helped create levels that reflected that. The game doesn't shy away from somber music, themes, and levels. At the very beginning of the game zooms out on a planet in the middle of a dark sky with slow, somber music. It's small, but that's what the game is all about. You're in space, and you're alone. But the emptiness does not just come from the sky, it comes from the story. Now, Mario and story don't traditionally go together in any serious way, but Koizumi was adamant to use the story to direct the atmosphere. Rosalina's storybook gives the player a new view of her backstory, and her motivation to discuss those events of her past. Rosalina is still sad. She's still in space, away from her home. And I think this is why Super Mario Galaxy 2 didn't quite click for me in the same way that the first one did. Don't get me wrong, I love the game, and on a technical level, it's much better designed. However, that empty, lonely atmosphere was gone. Instead, most levels use a similar bright blue sky and upbeat music. The levels are better designed, sure, but space didn't feel as exciting anymore. It didn't feel as meaningful and impactful anymore. And as such, even though the levels were better designed, I cared less about each individual one of them. But there's another issue when it comes to a dark sky. When games have a darker world, how does that world stay interesting? Simply looking at a dark color palette with a pitch dark sky, the world can be much less visually interesting. But developers know this. Take a game as dark and as gloomy as Elden Ring. There isn't a whole lot of color, but the world is made visually interesting through distinctly contrasting landmarks. Say, a glowing white tree. Or what about Twilight Princess? The Zelda games have always had a variety in color and brightness, even in their darker moments. So when Twilight Princess was coming out with a gloomy and dark world, they kept that gloom interesting with a crimson hue. The darkness isn't just black, it has a brooding sense, a brooding color. So even though it's darker, it's still visually interesting. So why do games stick with us? Have you ever set down a game at its completion just for the game to stick with you? Have you ever thought about a game long after you finished it? How does it feel? What do you remember? For me, it's the worlds I remember. For me, it's hard to just let go of a world that I've spent so much time adventuring through. These worlds, these atmospheres, they stick with you. The atmosphere improves your gameplay experience and makes the entire journey more meaningful. But as hard as it is to move on from a world in which you spent so much time, there are so many incredible worlds to journey to next. The worlds being created now are so staggeringly enticing, and designers continue to make games that are worth the player's engagement with exciting and innovative ideas with gorgeous atmospheres.